Welcome, boils and ghouls, to Handle with Scare. We are a horror podcast presented by the Slash and Cast Network, discussing horror movies and the phobias they emphasize. Love is in the air, but we have been exploring some terrifying sexual encounters in the genre throughout February to celebrate Valentine's Day. And, as you guys saw, as I shared them with you ahead of the release. I released a series of 16 different Valentines for the community that I posted on our Patreon as well as on our Twitter. And I have to say, that was a ton of fun. That was a tradition that I kind of carried over from one of my other podcasts that I'm no longer doing. So it's nice to sort of get back to one of the holiday roots that I had been doing for quite some time and, tailoring them around some genre titles here.
I enjoyed those. Yeah, those were a lot of fun. I shared them with my friends.
Yes, you printed them out. You cut them out into the little heart shapes and everything.
I gave them out in class.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so as you can tell, joining me tonight, as always, are my co-hosts. Up first, we have Holly Hooch. Holly, how you doing tonight?
Good, I'm doing great. Thank you.
And as you can tell, John is with us again, remotely, with Holly. John, so good to talk to you again. How's your week been?
Good to be here again, definitely. Yep, plans.
We have a background now for our podcast.
Ooh, plants. Not the type that are going to eat you, but maybe at some point. You never know.
Those are.
That'll be the surprise right at the end. Because that's how the plants welcome you home. The home in the movie we're talking about greets you in an entirely different way, which we'll get into that ending because there were two ways that I took that ending in regards to who the entity was greeting. But that's besides the point. So, last week we learned about the 1,001 different ways that Dennis Miller tried to ruin Tales from the Crypt presents Bordello of Blood. And, tonight we are shifting from the very campy 90s to some downright terrorizing in The Entity, released in 1982, directed by Sidney J. Furie. And The Entity revolves around a woman who is being tormented and sexually molested by an invisible demon. All right. So, before we talk about the movie, because there's a lot to unpack with this one, a couple of notes. We have watch parties every Thursday streaming at 8 p.m. Pacific time on Stream Lounge. Tomorrow we're doing a Fright Regs giveaway during that stream, and we'll be watching The Babysitter on Netflix. And, I'm sure you guys by now have heard about Stream Lounge from our podcast or one of our sister podcasts on the Slash and Cast Network, because I know the Conjecturing has their watch party. Their next one is this Saturday, also at 8 p.m. Pacific time, watching some Bad M Night with Lady in the Water. So I'm going to have to get absolutely shit-faced to make it through that movie, because it is that bad.
Wow.
For M Night.
I haven't seen it. I actually stopped at the one before that. I think is the last one I watched. Was the one before that the one with the village?
Yeah.
Yeah?
The village.
Yeah, that one also wasn't... Ugh.
It was a disappointing ending, a disappointing twist, and I was done with it. It was like, you know what, Em? I'm done.
Yeah, it's just not good. M Night has not the best track record. He's got his highs and lows. Highs are really good, lows are very forgettable. But tomorrow, I think one of my signatures fell. That's fine.
Like your house is haunted.
Yeah, my house might be haunted. Maybe I have the invisible demon. Besides the point. But tomorrow we'll be watching The Babysitter on Netflix, so it's free to sign up on Stream Lounge using your Netflix sub or whatever streaming software or service that the broadcaster is using at the time. So it can range anywhere from HBO Max, Shudder, Netflix, Disney Plus, and they got a couple of others that they are using as well. But it's been a great tool, and we've been doing that every Thursday here very recently. So I hope you guys join us there tomorrow, 8 p.m. Pacific time. Outside of that, merchandise. All right, so an update on that front. I talked about, maybe I'd be doing it at home But just the influx of orders has been all over the place, and I don't want to, because I haven't been as hands-on here recently. I don't want to just shove my way into there and be like, oh yeah, let me print out all these T-shirts. So I set up a shop front on TeePublic. So you can search "Handled with Scare." You should find us. I uploaded 3 of our designs, 2 of which are T-shirts, or hoodies, or whatever. There's a ton of different options. So we got our Jack in the Box version, as well as our zombie in the box as well. So go check that out. It is available to purchase as of the show. So go check that out. Hopefully people buy some stuff. If not, we'll add some more stuff, I'm sure, very shortly. But I still want to do a test run so all of us can get a T-shirt, printed from home, and then I'll mail them out to both of you in the near future. So
podcast paying off, man.
Yeah, 1 T-shirt at a time.
1 T-shirt at a time. One time I kind of stuck my foot in my mouth. I'm like, yay, merchandise. Do we have totes? And he's like, no. Do we have beer cozies? No. Sorry. But hey, totes in our future, right? Maybe,
for all your tote carrying.
Make it record size, and then you have multi-purpose. A grocery store and record store, antiquing.
That is true. And I'm curious to see whether or not the command strips behind me are going to hold up after I already lost 1 of the 4. But, who knows? We like to spice some things up. We're trying to really get into the mood for this movie, because there is a lot of shit that goes flying throughout the movie, or windows blowing out. Not that I'm hoping that happens. We don't need any of that, because the cleanup just too great, and I don't want to do any other remodeling here. But anyways, let's talk about the inspiration behind The Entity, because this movie has one of those based on a true story attachments at the very tail end of the movie. And I know whenever someone hears that, for any movie really, not just genre specific, they're always like, oh yeah, so normally the connection is like, oh, something happened at a house, or it happened in this town, or something really low-key that has no real attachment to it, and there's no similarities when it comes to the movie itself. With The Entity, that is 100% not the case. Now, it still is a loose adaptation of this woman's story, which, we'll get into. And, Holly, I'm sure you probably looked into this, too, because there are some similarities between the movie and the story of Doris Bither. And, there are some events in her life that, we do kind of see unfold in the movie as well, when it comes to, the eldest son getting kind of, thrown around by the Entity as well. But Doris was really the main victim of this story, but the family also suffered quite a great deal as well.
Right. I mean, I did get a chance to do a little bit of research, and it's actually it's out there in the internet. You can find a lot about the background of the story. So they did clean up the character quite a bit, which I think is a positive thing. Not because they're sort of changing the character, but because it's sort of it keeps people from really downing the story based on the background of the character. So by that I mean that in the real story, there was a lot of trauma that the woman had gone through. She was an alcoholic. The home wasn't a well-kept home. She was barely keeping it together. She had been in multiple abusive relationships. And so these are all things that people use, whether consciously or subconsciously, to doubt women and their stories of abuse. And they really negatively color a character, right? So in the movie, they cleaned up the character. She, there's a couple of references to alcohol, but in one of them, she's saying, no, I'm not going to do that tonight. The house is well kept, the kids are clean, and generally everything is nice and happy, except for the raping ghost. So there was that one change, but I think it was a positive one, so that you could focus on her and her story rather than having to battle your own prejudices against a woman because of a background that she might have.
Yeah, one of the interesting things too is, this movie kind of sat on the shelf for a couple of years. Because it was shot in 81, didn't really see a stateside release until 1983. And it really felt like the success of Poltergeist was really what pushed this forward to get released. Which is interesting because, like, I wouldn't necessarily say, like, this sort of movie is a great companion piece to Poltergeist just because of how drastic of a tone difference it is. Where, Poltergeist is more the traditional ghost story. This one, not so much. And, it takes some interesting turns into, like, parapsychology. And, they're kind of, like, teaming up with the university to try to come up with ways to deal with this malevolent force. And the idea that they came up with is, interesting, to say the least, because they're trying to basically, like, entrap this ghost.
When you call it science, it's really pushing it, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's some dry ice, y'all.
Yeah, we're gonna keep this ghost on rocks. There's no stupid one-liners like that outside, the final quip from the entity itself. But looking at the story behind the movie, and Doris Bither, basically this is someone's life who was just consumed with addiction, abuse. And,
Right.
spectral rape, just like it kind of is in the movie. And, her children were also being assaulted, and these things were happening on almost a nightly basis. So, you had Doris Bither, a mother of 4, who had lived in Culver City, California. And in 1974 is when, like, the attacks started to happen on her body, and, she had claimed that it was being done by a group of ghosts, which is important, because even in the story, we have some parallels there, because Carla felt like she was being held down by 2 smaller creatures. So what's interesting about this is, the spectral aspect of the assault kind of, like, dates back to, like, ancient Greek days and literature. And modern scientists have tied this phenomenon to sleep paralysis. So, you kind of always have those different thoughts in the movie kind of sprinkled in of, all right, is this woman actually sane or is she unwell? Because every step of the way, her story is being doubted by the people at the university outside of, the paranormal investigators at the time.
Even
but, like,
them, though, right?
even her best friend is like, have you been doing drugs? Like...
And to be quite, fair, that's what we would all do, right? That's your first assumption. Your first assumption isn't, ooh, paranormal. I mean, I don't know about you, John, but that's...
Yeah, no, that's... I was definitely thinking of the sleep paralysis and how this is before they knew what sleep paralysis was, and how much of it is night terrors and sleep paralysis, especially, I mean, brought on by her abuse and things like that, that she could definitely have had. I was kind of thinking, in the real world. And they do with that in the movie, obviously, to a certain extent, with the psychologist character, where they try to, have the, is it in her head or is
incidentally, the worst doctor ever, the worst therapist ever. He's so awful. Like, not only is he a bad doctor, but he crosses all, like, these boundaries of, like, ethical boundaries, and it's just like, oh my god, this guy sucks.
Yeah, that doesn't age so well, the whole, like, you're my patient, but more importantly, I'm romantically attracted to you, so therefore, like, I'm gonna save you. Like, that doesn't age so well.
No.
Yeah.
And the whole, like, I'm gonna tear her out of, like, experiments and stuff just cause. Like, that was weird. But I guess you were still going on about the background of the real story as opposed to getting into the movie.
Yeah, and there's so much going on with it, and obviously, all this information is available online, but basically, with the inspiration behind it, these occurrences were happening to the point where, like, even Doris's sons were referring to the ghost by a specific name. because it was happening so damn
Oh, wow.
often. And one of the son was mentioning how he saw his mom getting thrown across the room by the spectral, and he tried to stop the attack only to kind of get ragdolled himself. And the eldest son kind of like gave a description of what he saw, where it was like this fog-like entity. And these attacks had gone on for years, to the point where obviously the sons were back in their mother's story. And even the sons had some different things where, like, one of my favorite parts about the story was the eldest son was talking about his taste in music, and how if he played certain genres or certain bands like Black Sabbath or Uriah Heep, that the paranormal activity would really liven up in the house, so it would get more aggressive based on the music that was happening. So it all circles back to heavy metal, inciting the devil, and what have you. But I thought that was very interesting, that Black Sabbath would be spewing off this chain reaction of orbs appearing in the house, and we do get quite a bit of light show in the entity.
Better than the planetarium.
Yeah, that part was kind of interesting and funny. That just to connect what you were saying earlier about Poltergeist, I had to look up the date of the release of Poltergeist, which is 82, but obviously the similarities with the investigators coming in and setting up all the cameras and filming everything, and then they kind of have that light show similar to Poltergeist, where all the lights come down the stairs. I mean, it's different. This is like a laser show in the entity, but those similarities definitely stood out. But I didn't get to see about the story behind this one, but did they say they had those?
Oh yeah,
that was claimed to happen in the actual events.
So and pretty much how it was described. I mean, they were described in the one of the scientists. Oh, I don't want to be so judgmental. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying, like, I'm super skeptical, right? But one of the guys involved, there was a short documentary, like 30-minute documentary, where he's talking about the case, and he's talking about the differences between that and the movie, and how he was invited to, like, sort of have input in the movie, but not a lot. And he was saying how they were about the size of a human fist, and they were lime green. He described them as lime green. And that they were going back and forth. And then he also did describe that at one point it looked like they were outlining the figure of a man.
Interesting.
It was pretty interesting, yeah.
In terms of the real world part, I wonder about too a lot, especially specific to this era, the early 80s and late 70s. When you look at movies like this movie and Poltergeist and even Ghostbusters, which I believe came out around this time, is this idea of there being actual parapsychology departments at various colleges.
Right?
And
Isn't that crazy?
I really want to, I haven't looked into this, but I want to look into how real, I know this did sort of exist to a certain extent.
I've even heard that, like, really, really rich patrons would, like, when they would leave money to schools, to be like, hey, man, I want you to put in a department for ghosts. And then they would have to do it. And I don't know if that's how it kind of came about a little bit, because I can't imagine a bunch of academics saying, you know what? It's just, that one's really far-fetched to me. But like you were saying, like, I would really like to look into it, because if it exists, which I'm pretty sure it does, there's no way that they can lie that straight to my face, right?
No, definitely
and
not.
I don't mean the movies. I mean the guy in the 30-minute documentary, right?
Yeah, you're just like, screw opening up a new wing. Like, let's get a new department in.
Incidentally, that's my new fucking major. Are you kidding me? Yes. Sounds amazing.
That would be interesting and fun.
Studies into the occult can be my minor.
But I did think it was sort of weird how she encountered those two parapsychologists.
In a bookstore, yeah.
And they were talking about ghosts and everything. And then when she invites them to the house tour, they're super skeptical and doubting everything she says. And I'm like, what? These are like the parasites.
This is your idea.
I know, why are they telling her
This is your
everything.
whole thing. It kind of makes sense, though, because, I mean, like, as a parent, I mean, if you're looking for ghosts, then your very first thing is to try to disassemble, you know, stories and try to make sure, try to learn all the different tricks that people know to sort of create, you know, special effects and stuff. So I can sort of see it, but to your point, it's like, this was your idea.
You guys are the ones studying this in school.
You're the ones trying to make a life out of this.
Oh, man. All right. So, looking at some of the effects in the movie, you know, obviously we talked about the light show. Another one of the interesting bits about that was, you know, during some of the assault scenes, you know, there were times where you had, like, the invisible hand, so to speak, like, pressing down on Carla's body. And the way that they did that is they had a latex body double that was molded from her body. So, basically, what would happen is they would have the mold, and it was positioned up, you know, straight with her head. So, like, it was still, like, right on her, basically. And then there were these wires that were attached to it from underneath. So the effects team were, like, under the bed, and they would pull on the wire in order to make it look like her nude body was being groped by the entity, in this case.
I thought it was like suction cups, but I thought that was a pretty neat effect, and I thought it was really disturbing. Actually, kind of, it really did send chills up my body, especially when, like, you get a little taste of it when she's by herself and it's just fondling, and then like that was. I thought that was a really strong scene when you get the final attack. Well, not the final attack, the second to last attack, where her fiance sees it, and she's completely nude on the bed and being fondled, and it was very jarring to see her completely nude, because in all the other scenes they made such a big deal about only showing certain angles so that you couldn't see her body. So I thought that was that was a very effective scene, I thought. And when you get to see those special effects too, it was just, again, jarring is one of my favorite words to say when it comes to shit like this.
Definitely. No, the effects were really good. It kind of a bit like kind of reminded me of American Werewolf in London almost, you know, where the full body effect happening. I thought that was, you know, of course that would be CGI today.
Yeah.
I mean, they would have to do that.
I wish there was more puppetry, like Grogu. Isn't he a puppet? He's not CGI, right? He's like a $5 million puppet. It's adorable.
This felt sort of, this movie felt like, you know, during the post-Exorcist era where they were willing to take horror movies more seriously and not just be corny kind of, you know, vampires or Frankensteins running around, and to do a more serious ghost story or demon story.
I really appreciated that about this movie, because it could have really gone real cheese. And I've heard this said in other reviews too, just that between how the story is set up and the actress and just the amount of gravitas that everything was given, it's a very serious movie, and I appreciated that it didn't take that it didn't diverge away from that sort of seriousness.
Yeah, we've had a couple of movies since then that have kind of like honed in on the invisible or spectral aspect with assault in a few cases. Like, I think the main two that come to mind were like Hollow Man with Kevin Bacon, because, you know, he fondles the one redhead, and he also rapes his, you know, hot neighbor in that movie in one of the deleted scenes. And then also in the Invisible Man remake, that deals a lot with like torment and assault, more mental than physical in that case. But, you know, that was probably the most recent example that we had seen in the genre at this point. But, you know, like, bringing it back to the entity, like, I don't think either one of those really had it displayed at the forefront to the same extent as this movie did. And it's really what makes it such a jarring experience, like Holly said. And, you know, throughout this movie, you know, you kind of have that feeling of, well, like, is this house actually haunted, or is Carla herself really the cause of all of this? Because, you know, we learn much like the real life counterpart. Like, this is someone who had suffered a number of traumas throughout her childhood. She was sexually abused in her past. She had a teenage pregnancy. She lost her first husband after like a violent death. So you've had all of these really chaotic moments in her life that could very easily kind of like conjure up that negative sort of energy around her, which would make her super susceptible to something like this. But when you talk about the whole psychiatric part, Snyder-Man was an absolute douchebag throughout this. Where he's just like, oh yeah, no, that's not happening. You're just delusional. You're suffering from hysteria, which is always like the cornerstone of women in horror. Like, that's always the number one reason. That's not happening. You're being hysterical at this point.
But my favorite part is I got so mad at anybody who backed up her story. Could you please stop backing her? Stop lying. You're like, we're not lying. You're a fucking liar.
Yeah, like, I didn't break my wrist on purpose, dude. What the hell are you on about?
See, the problem is that you want to bang your son. Oh, that was a great scene. Where she was like, what the hell, man? She leaves, walks out on him. Like, what a piece of work, that doctor. Where did he go to school at? Shit.
Not to mention, he's that character actor who always plays the douchebag in every movie.
He's very good at it.
He's in the guy in Die Hard.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he's always that character is the funny thing. I wonder if this was his first kind of defining role in that.
And somebody was like, yeah.
Hire that
guy. We need a juice for this movie.
But I thought that this movie did, it does the thing that genre movies do well or can do well, which is talk about topics that a regular movie couldn't really talk about.
That's right, yeah.
And this is a straight up a movie about sexual assault and
stalking.
And it's like, it shows all the real world things where it's like people don't believe her until they see it happen firsthand. Yeah, it's like the tendency to not be believed, the person's continuously able to keep getting away with it.
Living with your attacker to the point where those attacks are not only frequent, but like there's no way to block them or there's no way to protect yourself, which is one of the really disturbing parts about the movie, that there's also that not only does it happens to her everywhere, right? So in her own home, in the fake home, in her car where he tries to kill her, and you see her like 2 little feet trying to hit the brake and nothing's happening. Like, that was terrifying too. But she's so vulnerable, and that's a very it was a hard, like, it was a tough feeling right throughout the movie, just like that the cringy part about not being able to say, well, if you do this, maybe if you find a way to like do things in such a way, you won't get attacked anymore. Like, my first thought was like, get out of the house, and then the second thought was don't be alone, and that shit didn't work either.
Yeah.
Oh, nothing worked. Because even when she's at her friend's house, she still has the windows blown out, and she gets attacked there. And then, of course, her friend and her husband are like, what the hell's going on? And that's finally, like, the turning point for her friend. Like, well, she didn't do this, clearly. Like, there's no way one woman. You just saw it. And, that's the other thing, too, because even though there are people in the movie who see the things that are happening, there's still always like that thought in the back of their minds of like, well, I don't know what I saw, like, even to that point, even though they've seen it firsthand, they still are denying it because they don't want to reach. They don't want to, like, knock out all of the possible real-life explanations and go to that extreme because it is really, like, the first of the kind and probably not something that they scientifically want to stand by because they feel like, I don't know, maybe they're going to get laughed out of the room or not be taken seriously in this case.
And even like on a personal level, I think a big part of not wanting to see the reality of things is because you can be a little lazy and you don't want to take action, or you don't, because, to understand, like, oh, okay, so now we need to dismantle this whole thing. It's a whole bunch, it's going to be a whole deal. And so you try to hold on to normalcy as long as possible, just because you don't want to get off your ass either, by the way. Or is that just me? But I thought that that it made a really good point of doing that, and I thought that the Invisible Man movie that you're talking about was at least had the same idea, right? So it was about persistent assault from somebody that she can't get away from. This one was her partner that she that she thinks is dead, right? In the Invisible Man movie, but still it's targeted, it's violent, it's sexual attacks, and there's a huge level of vulnerability because she just does not. Although even in that movie, like he's real, so he was killed again. In this movie, that's the horrible ending: is that there's no explanation. There's just a bunch of little clues, like maybe it is something that she's manifesting out of her own self, which is unlikely. Well, it's all right. Or maybe it's the spirit of her dad who was a creep. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. But then at the end, nothing is resolved. And even in real life, they do say how she moved from, I think it happened in Culver City or in LA in the movie, and originally in Culver City. Mm-hmm. And then she moved to another Texas. Texas was her final move, right? When the movie came out. And so, even in the epilogue or whatever you want to call it, it says that the intensity and the frequency went down, but they never stopped the attacks. Mm-hmm. So it's a really sad ending that there was no resolution, there was no understanding, and there was no end to it, which is a huge bummer.
I know. Cinematically, it's one of those things. Like I kept thinking about it during the movie, where it's like I feel like if this was made today, there would have been more sort of lore given about the entity than they did in that one. It felt like they were trying to stay so true to the original real world story that they weren't willing to sort of speculate about that stuff. But I feel, I don't know, it's like, it's that thing of like, is it better that they sort of left it mysterious, or is it better to give some info and lore so that you can have something to kind of latch on to,
wrap your head around it a little better? Yeah, I don't know if it sort of cheapens it, or if it's more of a unique story this way, where it's like, you know what, there's a million things on this planet that we can't explain. Here's one of them. Yeah. Versus, it was your ex. He faked his death, and then he got himself an invisible suit.
Yeah. Or it was, they probably would have, depending on who's making the movie today, I feel like they would have leaned more on the father, the potential that the entity was the father.
The ex or something, father, yeah. Oh, her father, yeah.
Who, there was a lot of implication that he had abused her.
And maybe, he died, and he was a preacher, and then, ugh, so gross.
But then, of course, there was the interdimensional talk that it was a sort of formless entity that never had a body.
And there was, 3 of dudes, one big one and 2 little ones, and I don't know where that came from.
They didn't quite expand on that. And that's the thing, is I feel like it feels sort of like you need that stuff in there, even though it's not part of the real world story, and it's kind of Hollywoodizing the story. But you kind of need it as a movie, to have that stuff. It. Yeah. Because, it does have, it does have that sort of hopeless feel of they set up this creature that can basically get her anytime, anywhere,
That ending, too. So the ending is totally made up. In the real world, nobody gave money to the parapsychologist. But in the Hollywood world, of course, they built this ginormous...
huge budget.
Huge budget, what do you call it?
Recreation of her house.
Yeah, so it's a mock-up. Yeah.
Yeah. With all kinds of... It's like
diorama. There we go.
Yeah, that ending. If
with guns that shoot.
Yeah, it was like a James Bond movie. And
then the hold of the guns, and he's chasing her throughout the house, trying to get her. And then the stupid safe space that they built for her didn't even fucking hold. Those guys were not well equipped. Oh, and did you guys were you guys really upset that, the level of anxiety, the lack of anxiety in the control booth, that really was upsetting to me. Here's this woman running from room to room. This monster is trying to get her with, fucking jets that they fucking built. And they're all just like smoking, like, oh dear.
They're like, oh man, we've lost control. Oh.
And here's the other one.
Hit all the buttons.
Yeah, push all the buttons. I'm like, really? There's so many buttons. Why don't you have a tech in here? Why is it their job to fucking push the buttons? They don't know what they're doing. And there's no sense of urgency except from the asshole, therapist who just wants to bang her.
Yeah, and that, like, circling back to, the whole, you should really come in for psychiatric help at this point. He wants her to commit herself to this. And, the entire time I'm just thinking, well, you've already basically said that you want to fuck her. See, now you're trying to bring her in so she can constantly be under your watch, so you can keep a close eye on her and all of that. And it's just like... You also have, like, that entire ordeal where he has, like, this booklet of, like, all of these, like, mythological creatures and being like, oh, well, all these people concocted these stories, like, you're supposed to be sensible, like, how do you think these came to be? Like, here, you got, like, a goblin, there's a ghoul here, there's trolls, and it's just like, man, he's just laying it on thick.
I feel like he got a hold of a Dungeons and Dragons monster manual and then like cut the monster pictures out of and created his own binder. He's like, look at these monsters.
It's real because it's in a book and it's the 70s.
It's in a book. It's in a binder that I created myself.
It's called Science. Have you heard of it?
Like, how come in every other horror movie he would have pulled like a mythology or a folklore book out of his library? Yeah, a real hardbound book.
Something dusty.
He's got his little homemade binder. That was very weird. Like, I feel like, they came to the day where they were filming that scene and they were like, oh my God, we forgot to get a book. Somebody in the props department whip something up real quick.
Yes, he's just cutting them out. He has a little glue stick.
Yeah.
Do it. They didn't have a Necronomicon, so what are you supposed to do?
I've made my own Necronomicon, not an actual skin one. It's a paper one, but it's not impossible to make. It's on the bookshelf over there.
They wouldn't let me check it out from the library.
So I had to take pictures and write it down by hand.
But also that doctor, he tried multiple times to get her committed against her will.
Yeah.
Like at least 3 times.
Her with it.
Yeah. That's so bad that he was doing that.
Yeah, he's like, we could do this. No, you can't. Yo, we could do it. He's like,
I could. He's like, I could lie and do it.
Oh my God, like that's a really great way to a girl's heart.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, I sort of forget though. How did they never ended up together?
No.
She basically moved away and still had, and he was left on his own. Yeah,
and I don't even know if his character was real. I think it was just he was added in. That was not. I'm trying to think of like some of those real life documentaries that I saw. Documentaries is a very loose word for the one I saw, by the way. But I don't think there was any mention of him. It could have just been. In fact, I don't think the woman saw a therapist at all. I think it was just a construct of the movie, which even then is horrible because it's like really like you decided to create this awful character.
Here's the thing too. You kind of like have that entire sequence where like all of the doctors are in the room together after hearing like this woman's experiences, and after she leaves, you have that conversation after. And this is the part of the movie that sticks with me the most because of how truthful it is in some cases. But basically, one of the doctors is just like, all right, this is what's actually happening. This girl, she has been in abusive relationships. She's finally found a guy that she likes. She got dicked out, she got some good dick, and now she is just sexually, promiscuous to the sense where she's chronically masturbating. So she just keeps touching herself and flicking the bean because she's had some good dick for the first time in her life. And it's just like, being dick drunk is a thing that happens. But it's just like that explanation of it being like, really? That's That's what you guys are going with here? Like, are you fucking serious?
I never heard the term dick drunk. I learned something new today. Dick drunk. Have I been dick drunk? Probably. Not for many years now. I don't think you can get dick drunk over the age of 35. Sorry, guys.
But it's just one of those things that I'm just like shaking my head and being like, of course. It'd be like the oldest guy in the room, like pulling that one out of the hat.
And then like a bunch of other guys in white coats smoking pipes going, yeah, nodding in agreement. Yeah, definitely dick drunk. I've made women dick drunk before, haven't you? And they'll, oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. It's all one-word responses, you know?
The one lady doctor still agreeing, like, bitch, speak up.
All right, so outside of that, you know, one of the common trends is, you know, seeing these violent assaults happening only for the people around her to kind of like be left shell shocked. And this happens with her boyfriend in the movie, Jerry, where, you know, you mentioned, you know, she's laying down on the bed, and that's when we got the whole body double for the torso effect, where she's getting pressed down on her breast. And, you know, Jerry comes out of the bathroom, sees what's happening, and really doesn't know what to make of it.
Yeah, he spent way too many seconds not doing anything.
Yeah,
but
her son.
shock.
Yeah, her son also comes into the room, sees what's going on, and mistakes Jerry for the attacker. And, you know, there's a scuffle between the two. But after they bring Carla to the hospital after this assault, you know, Jerry is talking to the dick psychiatrist. And he's just so troubled by what he saw that he just ends the relationship. Like, right on the spot, being like, nope, like, not dealing with this crazy.
Cancer. Not with ghost dick.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a bummer.
Yeah, not that I'm offended by this in any way, but men are definitely not portrayed well in this movie. Like, the best friend, it's like the main character is being abused by what we assume is a male entity.
Right,
the best friend's husband is fairly kind of abusive and a dick.
Yeah.
You know, he's meant to be sort of heroic, but essentially, like, the romantic. And her, of course, as we said, her boyfriend leaves
and
her.
Even her son, too, is like, he's really dismissive, too, from the get-go. Mm-hmm. Like, look, Ma, it's just this pipe. You made it all up.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. It really dragged you guys. But that should, you know, goes to show if you guys are in a similar situation, you know, believe ghosts, and then, you know, don't run out, and then don't become therapists, and then try to sleep with your clients.
That is, I mean, it's interesting with, obviously, to bring up the Me Too movement. Mm-hmm. I mean, a very strong theme of this movie is believe the victim.
Yeah, it is.
You know, that's a big running theme throughout the entire story.
Yeah, like, you know, and I mentioned this earlier in the show, was that they ended up cleaning up that character a lot, because otherwise audiences wouldn't have that sort of... they wouldn't be siding with her. They'd be just as judgmental, right? Mm-hmm. So they had to make her like this perfect woman that was being attacked.
Well, and it's kind of like it's almost like a court thing, where it's like, if this was like a court situation, her lawyers would be like, well, we don't want the jury to judge her based on her previous life. We want them to judge her based on what happened here in this event. And it's kind of like that situation where it's like, and they do it in the media where they'll paint like a victim or somebody as like a bad person. Well, you know, this bad thing happened to this person, but they were a bad person, so it's not that bad. You know, so it's kind of okay that it happened to them, kind of thing. You know.
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting movie. I'm glad we chose it. It wasn't as fun as the other ones, of course. But I think it's really cool to have movies in here that every once in a while that we talk about that are you know, that really take you out of it, that really push you, that are genuinely scary. I mean, it's horror, right? And this is horrifying. I mean, not to be creepy, but did you guys watching this movie at any time put yourself in her shoes, and what would you do if you were being raped in your home by an entity? I don't know. Think about it, guys. Rough, right? Rough. Not good, right?
No.
There'd be a lot more crying. I'm sure there would be a lot more crying.
I know. I kept thinking, like, in the movie, I kept being, like, frustrated because I was like, I want there to be a thing where she can, like, figure out some way to fight back or to, a weakness. Like, like, this entity appears to be unstoppable at first, but she eventually starts figuring out a way. Yeah. I kept, I wanted it to be that way, that a little more Hollywood, but it wasn't. I know, and that's the thing is, do we think that the reason this movie is not out there readily available, you can judge, you can judge it. It's like even not, pirating is wrong, kids, but even on the pirate waves, there are only a few copies of this out there. And I'm wondering if it's like sort of too real for people, too dark.
I don't know.
It's not.
I'm sorry, finish your thought.
Well, just to bring up Exorcist, which is a very dark and realistic movie, and yet doesn't deal with as dark a topics as sexual assault, and so this is a much darker and bleaker movie than
it was so hard to get a hold of, for sure. But the thing that's so weird is that the topic is intense and there's no resolution. But when they don't add extra horror to it. Mm-hmm. There's not a lot of gruesomeness to it at all. There's it's the sexual assaults. So it's so weird that a movie like this would get sort of trying to get like swept under the rug when there's, I don't know, like even do you guys know what I'm saying? Where like it's so laid out in a as close to realistic way as possible. It's not sensationalized as much. I mean, of course, until the last scene with the jets and whatnot, but the assaults, Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to me that you say that, because I'm like, oh, that's so weird, because it doesn't seem like that kind of movie that would merit that kind of reaction, but the topic is so sensitive that maybe there it is. And like you were saying, it does drag dudes a lot.
But not in a I think it's done in a subtle way. It's not like a men are bad movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very subtle, because you don't, and in fact, it was produced and written by men, so that's the worst part. It drags you accidentally.
The no resolution, no happy ending. I mean,
no way to fight back,
and you can even deal with an unhappy ending if there's some kind of resolution, but there's not even that.
It just keeps on happening. It just kind of dies off on its own.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things too is you kind of have that act of defiance on Carla's part when you get towards the tail end of the movie, when she does trap herself behind the glass, when the entity is trying to kill her using the tanks, since it's taking control over it. And, you have that moment where she's just standing her ground, telling the entity, like, hey, like, you can never have me, like, this is through. And, you just have that moment where it's a very empowering moment for her, because, you kind of have that sense that, she's taken her life back within that moment. And, of course, the douchebag psychiatrist rushes in to make the save as... the entity eventually gets frozen for a brief period of time as it's being encased in this large mass of ice with the containers. And, of course, what happens? The entity ends up breaking free and vanishes. But the ending of this movie, when she returns home, the only thing I'm thinking of when you get that welcoming message back, which is only 3 words... I'm just trying to think, well, is he talking to her, or is the entity talking to her vagina? It's one of the two.
What was it? What was the third word? I caught home, I caught cunt. I didn't catch the third word.
Did you say welcome home?
Cunt.
Is that what he said? Yeah, that's what I thought he said.
The dude's a real dick.
Where were we?
So we were just talking about... the jets.
Mm-hmm. The exploding. He exploded out of the ice.
Oh, right.
The helium. What was it?
The frozen helium. It's like, what helium?
Yeah, I know. Why is that? Why does that work?
That's why I mentioned the word helium before, because I'm like, was that right? Is that what they did?
Yeah. It's like, Where are you guys coming
But it's all
with
made
this?
up anyway, right? So that piece wasn't real anyway.
Was that not from? Did they not in the real version of the story? Did they not?
In the real version of the story, she does meet them, and they do a bunch of. I mean, the students, and because that's the guy who was sort of talking in that little documentary I saw, and he was saying that they worked together. They didn't have a lot of money, so they did as many tests as possible. They took pictures, and even then, he was saying that the equipment they had available in the 70s was so subpar that he says like, well, now, and this was from like the 90s. He was like, well, now we would be able to do a lot more, blah blah blah. But that they lost touch with her after she moved to Texas, and that they saw her at the premiere of the movie. But that whole sequence of them of her going to the university and working there with
freezing.
Yeah, that didn't happen.
Very science fiction.
I mean, it was a lot of money if you think about it. Like, how much did that cost? That gigantic, apartment, or her home, and that was just way too advanced. There was no way that was gonna happen.
Yeah, that was the most unbelievable part of the movie.
But it was still pretty fun.
I mean, you didn't have plumbing, you didn't have gas. All you had is a stocked refrigerator, basically.
And then I sort of feel like your average horror movie. Like everything up until then was just, it was very somber, and rightly so. But they did give you that very sensationalized ending, which
Hollywood ending.
Yeah, Hollywood ending. Yeah, interesting. Oh yeah.
It is interesting. Like, it's like you could definitely make this movie again and do it as a very even more real world and toned down psychological type of movie and not have the crazy ending,
Right.
This could be, I think, remade in a good way.
Let's call Hollywood. Let's make this happen.
They're remaking everything anyways.
That's true. Ideas.
And am I mistaken? Wasn't there an Entity 2 that ended up coming out? I meant to look and I forgot to. But I feel like they ended up making a weird sequel that just kind of flopped and disappeared. But I could be wrong about that.
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Oh, I did want to mention that when we were watching the Japanese horror movies last month, one thing that I mentioned was that I hadn't noticed, or I hadn't seen a movie at that point, or at least I couldn't remember the entity, that where a ghost follows you out of your house. And I was like, oh, here's one. Tries to kill her in her car.
Yeah, and her friend's house.
In Poltergeist too?
Poltergeist does that. Yeah.
Oh shit! So I was really wrong about not really saying movies that did that. There's plenty.
Yeah, is that just a coincidence? Just to bring up the whole Poltergeist thing again, where that exact kind of thing of there's the two paranormal investigators with the psychic woman, and they come and set up. I mean, it's so similar, and they came out right at the similar time. That's
been brought up in other reviews, too. I mean, like the similarities, and that came out afterwards, though, right?
Well, they both came out in 82, but apparently Entity was being, I think, maybe made before Poltergeist. It was in production before.
I mean, it had to be influenced. You see that happen a lot with competing studios, right? Where they catch wind of what one of them is working on, and they're like, we'll make one, too.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And parapsychology and that kind of stuff was very popular at that time, I remember.
Yeah.
We had that TV show In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy hosting. It was kind of like a ghosts and Bigfoot kind of show.
You don't see as much of that as much anymore. Or maybe now you get a chance to choose whatever you want to watch.
Yeah.
Well, that's the Entity for you.
Much darker than the last one.
Much darker than the last couple.
A little bit.
And darker than even Cronenberg's, for sure.
Whoa, that's right. Yes.
I mean, they were both sex crazed, but in very different ways.
Yeah. Cronenberg's, even though he was going for kind of a serious tone, too, but it still was inevitably wackier than Entity was.
I mean, well, up next we've got what? It Follows?
Yes. Next week we have our patron selection, which is It Follows, which was released in 2014. That one being directed by David Robert Mitchell. So again, circling back to Scooby-Doo horror, much like Thanksgiving.
Well, that was Thanksgiving. I'm just gonna say that It Follows kind of has like a slow, dark, somber tone to it as well. I mean, nothing, anywhere close to Entity, because this one is really pushing the, based on real events kind of perspective, which kind of brings like a deep sadness to it. But yeah, It Follows. Last time I watched it, I remember liking it, so I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I mean, this was one of the more hyped indie releases of the genre. I mean, really, the past decade.
Right.
And, kind of like the story behind it, or at least like the main driving point of the story, was encouraging people to have sex. So it kind of has that Cherry Falls type motive behind it.
Pass it on.
Yes. Have it be someone else's problem. That's the way to do it.
Incidentally, kids, that's not how STDs work. It's everybody's problem.
Yeah. Wow. The more you know. All right. Well, anything else that you guys want to talk about with the Entity, or should we wrap things up for tonight?
I think I'm good. How about you, John?
Yeah, I think I've said everything. Definitely.
We said all the words.
We said all the words. We did all the things, and we're not gonna greet you the same way the Entity did in this movie, because man, like I figured, okay, it's 80s horror. There has to be like a one-liner, but the first time I saw that, I'm just like, wait, that's what we're going with? It's just one of those moments. But to each their own. At least she made the wise decision of just leaving the house again at that point. She's like, nah, man, you can't have me. Fuck this, I'm out of here. Hops in the car and just drives off to Texas, in this case.
That was, I guess, just to go back a tiny bit, like, that was the weird thing I was a little confused about with the ending when he said, welcome home. And then they leave, but it's like, we know he can follow her, so I don't know,
Yeah.
It was a little weird, because it's like, well, she's not leaving him behind. He's gonna be with her.
I don't know. Maybe that was Hollywood.
I don't know. We do. If there's not a sequel, we need a sequel. We need like a Ghostbusters sequel where she like fully gets revenge and kicks its ass and like
very
dispels
Hollywood.
it back to its universe.
That's right. And he gets sent to like ghost prison.
Or it's just a role reversal and she's going around as the rapist and attacking ghosts.
Oh man.
I don't know how that would work, but you never know.
Good.
That's a terrible idea. We're not going with that
terrible.
one.
Terrible idea, T.
I mean, there's been weirder movies made. But anyways, all right. So if you guys are looking to contact the show, of course, you can do this in a number of different ways. We have our Patreon at patreon.com/handofwithscare. We have tiers started at just $1 a month. So what does that get you? Well, you get early access to the podcast feed before they drop on the podcatchers. You can select our next phobia for the month, or even select movies that we're talking about for whatever our topic of choice is for the month. We also have Instagram, Handle with Scare Pod. We're on YouTube also at Handle with Scare Pod. On Twitter at Handle with Scare. But primarily, you can find all of our show information on our website at handlewithscarepod.com. But for now, just a reminder, again, tomorrow, Thursday, 8 p.m. Pacific Time, every week on Stream Lounge, we have our watch parties. We do a $25 Fright Rags giveaway as we watch The Babysitter, which is a really fun horror/comedy movie, which also got a sequel on Netflix as well. But, until then, guys, you've been listening to Handle with Scare. This has been episode number, what are we at, like 46? 47? 47? Yeah, we're getting close to 50 already. It's crazy at this point. But, for now, I've been Totemlydrunk, joined, as always, by my co-hosts, Holly, Hooch, and John, and we'll see you back next week. You take care, and have a good night.